On June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy with over 150,000 troops, launching the liberation of Western Europe. In the Persian Gulf today, a different amphibious force is preparing for an operation that military planners have quietly war-gamed for decades. The target is not a continent, but a small limestone island called Kharg, just 34 miles off the coast of Iran. If the order comes, the world will witness an assault that echoes the scale and daring of D-Day, but with one crucial difference. The enemy would be waiting not just on the beaches, but across the narrow stretch of water, armed with ballistic missiles, naval mines, and swarms of attack drones designed to turn the Gulf into a cauldron. Unlike Normandy, where the Allies enjoyed overwhelming air superiority and a relatively secure sea lane to England, an invasion of Kharg would take place inside a bathtub of a sea, surrounded by Iranian territory on three sides. The American landing force would have no vast logistical rear area, no friendly ports just over the horizon. Instead, it would rely entirely on ships that themselves would be under constant threat from Iranian anti-ship missiles launched from the mainland. This is the paradox of Kharg. It is close enough to Iran to be a viable target, yet that same proximity makes it one of the most dangerous pieces of real estate on Earth to seize. The planners who study this scenario know that the first 24 hours would determine everything, and they have built their strategies around a single goal. Get Marines onto the island, secure the oil terminal before it can be destroyed, and establish a defensive perimeter before Iran can respond in force. This video breaks down every stage of this potential campaign. We will examine why Kharg Island has become the focal point of American contingency planning, the Marine Expeditionary Units poised to conduct the amphibious landing, the Tier 1 Special Operations Forces such as Delta Force and the Navy SEALs' role in the assault, and the Iranian defenses that would try to stop them. We will walk through the invasion from the opening cruise missile strikes to the brutal fight to hold the island under constant drone and missile attack. Finally, we will confront the central question that haunts every scenario. Would seizing Kharg be a modern D-Day, a bold and decisive stroke that reshapes the strategic landscape, or would it become the first step into an escalation trap from which there is no easy exit? Before we continue, please support the channel by liking the video, hitting the hype button, and subscribing to help us grow. We greatly appreciate your support. Why Kharg Island suddenly matters. Kharg Island is not a tourist destination. It is a jagged limestone outcrop in the northern Persian Gulf, roughly 7 miles long and 3 miles wide, yet it handles nearly all of Iran's crude oil exports. That singular fact transforms this speck of land into the economic heart of the Islamic Republic. Oil tankers that cannot load at Kharg have nowhere else to go. The island's jetties and pipelines are the main valve through which Tehran's most vital revenue flows. In 1988, during the so-called Tanker War, American naval forces struck Iranian oil platforms in retaliation for mining operations, and the target of choice was Kharg. Even then, military planners understood that hitting the island was like cutting the country's financial jugular. Geographically, Kharg sits in a position that magnifies its importance. It lies roughly 34 miles northwest of the port city of Bushehr, placing it within easy striking distance of Iran's mainland anti-ship missile batteries. More critically, it is situated near the approach to the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which about 1/5 of the world's petroleum transits. An American occupation of Kharg would therefore accomplish two goals at once. First, it would sever Iran's primary oil export revenue, depriving the government of billions of dollars monthly. Second, it would give the United States a forward operating base from which to monitor and, if necessary, reopen the Strait of Hormuz should Iran attempt to close it. But the island's significance goes beyond economics and geography. Kharg has long been a symbol of Iranian resilience. During the Iran-Iraq War, it withstood repeated Iraqi airstrikes designed to cripple Iran's oil exports. The Iranians built massive underground storage tanks and hardened facilities, turning the island into a fortress that continued to pump oil even as bombs fell nearby. Seizing it today would strike at both the material and psychological foundations of Tehran's power. For the Islamic Republic, losing Kharg would not merely be a military setback, it would be a public humiliation broadcast to the world. That is precisely why the idea of an American invasion has become a recurring subject of speculation among defense analysts and intelligence agencies. Yet for all its importance, Kharg remains a difficult target. Its proximity to the Iranian mainland means any invading force would be operating within the shadow of Iranian coastal defenses. The island itself has limited beaches suitable for amphibious landing, and its oil infrastructure is a maze of pipes, storage tanks, and jetties that could be rigged for demolition. Whoever holds the island must also supply it entirely by sea or air, a logistical challenge that would tie down significant American naval assets for the duration of the occupation. In other words, Kharg is the kind of prize that can only be held if you are willing to pay a constant price in blood and treasure. Understanding why the island matters is the first step toward grasping the larger stakes. It is not a random patch of rock. It is the economic lever that, if pulled, could force Iran to either escalate dramatically or capitulate. And in the high-stakes calculus of Persian Gulf security, that lever has never looked more tempting to American war planners than it does today. Why the United States would even consider seizing it? Why would the United States risk a war with Iran over a small island? The answer lies in the delicate balance of power that governs the Strait of Hormuz. For years, Iran has threatened to close the strait in response to sanctions or military pressure, a move that would choke off oil shipments from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. Washington has long relied on a simple deterrent: the presence of the United States Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, backed by carrier strike groups that patrol the waters of the Gulf. But in recent years, Iran has built up an arsenal of anti-ship ballistic missiles, naval mines, and swarms of small attack boats that could theoretically overwhelm the American naval presence long enough to sow chaos. Seizing Kharg Island offers a potential solution to this dilemma. If Iran attempts to close the Strait of Hormuz, an American assault on Kharg would strike at the heart of Iran's own ability to export oil. The logic is brutal but coherent. Threaten our oil shipping routes, and we will physically take your primary oil terminal. In that sense, the invasion would not be an act of territorial conquest, but a coercive operation designed to force Tehran to back down. The island becomes a bargaining chip, held until Iran agrees to reopen the strait and cease its harassment of commercial shipping. There is also a broader strategic context. Iran's nuclear program remains a persistent source of tension, and any future crisis involving the program could easily spill over into the Gulf. Some American strategists argue that a limited operation against Kharg would demonstrate to Iran that the United States is willing to use force to defend its interests without embarking on a full-scale invasion of the Iranian mainland. It would be a message, wrapped in the form of a military campaign, intended to re-establish deterrence after years of Iranian provocations. Current reporting suggests that the idea has moved from theoretical war games to actual contingency planning. The movement of Marine expeditionary units into the region, along with prepositioned naval assets, has fueled speculation that Washington is actively preparing for such a scenario. Military analysts point out that the United States has already struck targets on Kharg in recent months, hitting missile storage facilities and mine depots while carefully preserving the oil infrastructure. Those strikes serve a dual purpose. They degrade Iranian defenses while simultaneously signaling to Tehran that American planners are studying the island in minute detail. But the decision to invade would not be taken lightly. Every president who has faced the prospect of war with Iran has ultimately pulled back, mindful of the unpredictable consequences. Yet the calculus may be shifting as Iran's conventional and asymmetric capabilities grow. For a White House seeking to deter Iranian aggression without launching a ground war, The idea of a swift, limited seizure of Kharg Island may appear as the least bad option among a set of deeply unappealing choices. The American units most likely to be involved in a Kharg operation. If the order came, the force that would spearhead the invasion is already in place. The United States Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain, would serve as the Naval Command Authority, but the ground fighting would fall to the Marine Corps, supported by a constellation of Special Operations units. 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, or MEUs, have recently operated in the region. The 31st MEU, which has been associated with the amphibious assault ship USS Tripoli, and the 11th MEU, which has operated aboard the USS Boxer. Each MEU is a self-contained fighting force of roughly 2,200 Marines, combining infantry, artillery, aviation, and logistics into a single package that can launch from ships and fight independently for weeks. The 31st MEU, in particular, brings a range of capabilities that would be essential for an assault on Kharg. It operates He-35B, Lightning, the second strike aircraft capable of vertical landings, allowing them to fly from the deck of an amphibious ship and provide close air support within minutes of a call. MV-22 Osprey tiltrotor aircraft give the Marines the ability to bypass contested beaches by flying directly onto the island's interior, inserting assault forces faster than traditional landing craft. Helicopter squadrons would provide troop transport, medical evacuation, and resupply, while the MEU's boat teams would secure landing zones along the shoreline. Yet a marine amphibious assault is only one piece of the puzzle. Before the first Osprey touches down, Special Operations Forces would have already been on the island, perhaps for days. The Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC, would likely deploy its most elite units to soften the target. Delta Force, officially known as the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, would be tasked with destroying key air defense sites, disabling communications nodes, and identifying the exact locations of Iranian commanders. The Naval Special Warfare Development Group, commonly called SEAL Team 6, would work alongside them, using miniature submarines to approach the island from the sea and conduct reconnaissance of the beaches. Conventional Navy SEALs from the West Coast or East Coast teams would also play a critical role. They would be responsible for clearing the sea lanes around Kharg before the main force arrives, disabling any Iranian naval mines or fast attack craft that could threaten the amphibious ships. Underwater demolition teams would survey the landing beaches, ensuring that the seabed is free of obstacles that could rip open the hulls of landing craft. These operators would operate in the black of night, often within sight of Iranian sentries, gathering the intelligence that would determine where and when the main assault would land. Supporting the Marines and special operators would be a flotilla of destroyers, cruisers, and submarines from the Fifth Fleet. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles would provide the initial barrage that silences Iranian radar and missile batteries on the mainland. A carrier strike group, likely built around a Nimitz or Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier, would station itself in the Gulf of Oman, out of range of Iranian shore batteries, but close enough to launch continuous airstrikes. The Navy's EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft would jam Iranian communications, creating a bubble of confusion that would isolate Kharg from its mainland reinforcements. This collection of forces represents the most capable expeditionary striking power on the planet. Yet even with all these assets, the planners know that the first hours of the invasion would be the most perilous. The forces involved are designed for speed and shock, but they would be operating in a narrow waterway where a single mine or missile could change the course of the entire campaign. The Iranian units and defenses America would face. The Iranians do not have a navy that can match the United States in open water. Instead, they have built a layered, asymmetric defense that is perfectly suited to the confined geography of the Persian Gulf. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, or IRGC Navy, would be the primary force defending Kharg. Unlike the regular Iranian Navy, which operates larger vessels and focuses on conventional warfare, the IRGC Navy is designed for swarming tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and the extensive use of naval mines. It is a force that does not seek to win a single decisive battle. It seeks to make any American operation so costly that the political will to continue collapses. The immediate defenses of Kharg Island itself would consist of a garrison of IRGC naval infantry and besieged militiamen, likely numbering several hundred to 1,000 personnel. They would be equipped with short-range anti-ship missiles, mortars, and machine gun positions covering the limited landing zones. The island's infrastructure has been hardened over decades, with bunkers built into the hills and oil storage tanks that double as defensive positions. Iranian commanders on the island would likely have pre-planned demolition charges wired throughout the oil terminals, ready to ignite the facility if they are forced to withdraw. But the greatest threat to an American invasion would not come from the island's garrison. It would come from the mainland, just 34 miles away. Iran has deployed a network of coastal defense missile batteries along the shoreline near Bushehr and Bandar Abbas. These batteries include the Chinese-built C-802 anti-ship cruise missile and the indigenous Noor missile, both of which can strike moving naval targets at sea. More ominously, Iran has developed anti-ship ballistic missiles like the Khalij Fars and Persian Gulf, which can be launched from mobile launchers hidden in the Zagros Mountains. These missiles travel at supersonic speeds and are designed to strike large vessels like amphibious assault ships or aircraft carriers. Naval mines represent another existential threat. American intelligence assessments estimate that Iran possesses stockpiles of up to 6,000 naval mines, ranging from simple contact mines to sophisticated bottom mines that can be planted by submarines or civilian vessels. In the shallow, silt-filled waters of the Persian Gulf, mines are notoriously difficult to detect and clear. Iran could seed the approaches to Kharg with mines in the days leading up to an invasion, or it could deploy fast mine-laying boats under the cover of darkness to create a barrier that would delay or even stop an amphibious landing. Finally, Iran would employ a vast arsenal of drones and small attack boats. Shahed 136 one-way attack drones, which have been used extensively in conflicts across the Middle East, could be launched from the mainland to strike American ships or the island itself after it is captured. The IRGC Navy operates hundreds of small bog hammer-style speedboats, many of which are armed with rockets or packed with explosives to serve as suicide craft. In any conflict over Kharg, these boats would attempt to swarm American naval assets, overwhelming their defenses through sheer numbers and speed. Understanding this defensive array is crucial because it reveals a fundamental truth about a Kharg invasion. The battle would not be decided solely on the island. It would be decided in the waters and skies between the island and the mainland, where American naval power would be forced to absorb the full weight of Iran's asymmetric arsenal. How the invasion would begin. When the order is given, the first signs of an invasion would not be Marines on the beach. They would be flashes in the night sky, visible for miles across the Persian Gulf. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from Arleigh Burke destroyers and nuclear submarines would streak toward Kharg Island, striking with pinpoint accuracy at radar sites, anti-aircraft batteries, and command bunkers. Simultaneously, F-35, lightning the second aircraft from the deck of the USS Tripoli, would penetrate Iranian airspace, using their stealth to destroy mobile missile launchers that might have escaped the initial missile barrage. Within the first hour, the island's air defenses would be silenced, or at least degraded to the point where follow-on forces could operate. But the opening strikes would not be limited to Kharg itself. American planners know that the mainland batteries pose the greatest threat to the invasion fleet. B-52H Stratofortress bombers, flying from bases in Qatar or Diego Garcia, would lay minefields in the sea approaches between Kharg and the mainland, slowing any attempt by Iranian fast attack craft to reinforce the island. Navy EA-18G Growlers would blanket Iranian radar with jamming signals, creating electronic shadows that allow the invasion force to approach without being tracked. Cruise missiles would strike known anti-ship missile sites along the coast near Bushehr, while F-15E Strike Eagles would hunt for mobile launchers using data from airborne drones. With the air and missile threats suppressed, the Special Operations Forces would go in. Delta Force operators would fast rope from MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters onto the island's oil terminal complex, their mission to secure the control rooms and prevent the Iranians from detonating demolition charges. SEAL Team 6 would land on the beaches, using the cover of darkness to eliminate coastal defense positions and mark safe lanes for the incoming amphibious force. Conventional Navy SEALs would clear the waters of mines, using explosive charges to destroy any obstacles that could rip open landing craft. These operations are the razor's edge of the invasion. If they succeed, the main force lands unopposed. If they fail, the Marines could be walking into a killing zone. The main assault would come at first light. M-Phi 22. Ospreys from the 31st MEU would lift off from the deck of the USS Tripoli, loaded with rifle companies, and streak toward Kharg at speeds that outpace any Iranian response. Their tiltrotor design allows them to land vertically, which means they can deposit Marines directly onto the island's interior, bypassing the beaches entirely. Simultaneously, landing craft air cushion vehicles, known as LCACs, would race toward the shore at 50 knots, carrying M1A1 Abrams tanks and amphibious combat vehicles. Helicopters would provide covering fire, engaging any Iranian positions that reveal themselves. Within hours, the Marines would have secured the island's airfield, the port facilities, and the key road junctions that connect the oil terminal to the rest of the island. The objective would not be to destroy the Iranian garrison, though that would inevitably happen, but to seize the oil infrastructure before it can be demolished. Explosive ordnance disposal teams would race through the terminal, cutting wires and disabling booby traps. Engineers would assess the jetties and pipelines, determining what repairs are needed to resume oil exports if the political decision is made to do so. By the end of day one, the island would be in American hands, but the battle for Kharg would be far from over. What would be the hardest fight? Taking Kharg Island is the easy part. Holding it against the inevitable Iranian counterattack is where the real war begins. Within hours of the American flag being raised over the oil terminal, Iran would unleash the full weight of its asymmetric arsenal. The island's proximity to the mainland means that it sits within range of hundreds of missiles, rockets and drones, all of which can be launched from positions that American aircraft cannot easily destroy. For the Marines and special operators on the ground, the occupation would become a daily struggle against indirect fire, suicide drones, and the constant threat of infiltration by Iranian naval commandos. The first challenge would be air defense. The island's small size means there is no room for deep defensive positions. Every inch of ground is within range of mortar fire from the mainland. Iranian drones, particularly the Shahed 136, would be launched in waves, each one carrying a warhead large enough to destroy a fuel storage tank or kill a squad of Marines. The Navy's Aegis destroyers would have to maintain a constant defensive screen, using standard missiles to intercept incoming threats, but the sheer volume of drones could overwhelm even the most sophisticated air defense system. The Marines would rely on shoulder-launched Stinger missiles and the counter-drone capabilities of their own organic aviation assets, but any failure in the defense would result in catastrophic damage to the oil infrastructure. Mines would pose a second, more insidious threat. Iran has the capability to sow mines in the waters around Kharg within hours, using small boats that can evade detection. These mines would not only threaten resupply ships and landing craft, but also trap the amphibious forces on the island. The Navy's mine countermeasure forces, including MH-53E Sea Dragon helicopters and unmanned underwater vehicles, would work around the clock to clear lanes through the minefields. But in the shallow, murky waters of the northern Gulf, mine clearance is a slow and dangerous process. One missed mine could sink a logistics ship carrying food, water, and ammunition for the garrison. The third challenge would be the threat of Iranian fast attack boats. The IRGC Navy maintains hundreds of small agile craft that can be armed with rockets, machine guns, or explosives. These boats would attempt to run the American naval blockade, using speed and small radar cross-sections to reach the island and launch raids against the American positions. The Navy's coastal patrol ships and helicopters would intercept many of these attacks, but the sheer number of boats means that some would inevitably get through. A single explosive-laden speedboat ramming a fuel jetty could set off a chain reaction of fires that would destroy the very infrastructure the invasion was meant to preserve. Finally, there would be the human element. The Marines on Kharg would be operating under constant psychological strain. The island offers no cover from the heat, no relief from the threat of incoming fire, and no ability to rotate units out of the line of contact without exposing them to naval attack. Sustaining the force would require a continuous flow of supplies delivered by helicopter or landing craft, each one vulnerable to Iranian fire. The battle for Kharg would become a test of endurance as much as a test of arms, and it is in that grinding, attritional fight that Iran believes it can inflict enough pain to make the American occupation politically unsustainable. How America could win. An American victory in a Kharg invasion would not look like the triumphant raising of a flag. It would look like the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz to international shipping, followed by a negotiated withdrawal that leaves the island intact and Iranian oil exports flowing again under strict monitoring. The United States would define success not by permanent occupation, but by achieving its strategic objective, demonstrating that any Iranian attempt to close the strait would result in the immediate loss of Iran's own ability to export oil. In that sense, victory would be measured in deterrence restored, not in square miles held. The military path to that victory would require the United States to accomplish several things simultaneously. First, the American forces would have to suppress Iranian mainland missile and drone launches to the point where the island can be resupplied without prohibitive losses. This would involve sustained airstrikes against Iranian launch sites, logistics nodes, and command centers, using intelligence from drones and satellites to strike mobile launchers before they can fire. The Navy's carrier air wing would fly hundreds of sorties daily, each one targeting a specific piece of Iran's asymmetric arsenal. Over time, the Iranian ability to strike the island would degrade, not because Iran runs out of weapons, but because the infrastructure needed to coordinate and launch those weapons becomes too costly to operate. Second, the United States would need to neutralize Iran's naval mine threat on a permanent basis. This would require a combination of naval operations to hunt down Iranian mine-laying vessels and diplomatic pressure on Iran to cease such activities under threat of further escalation. The Navy's mine countermeasure forces would establish a cleared shipping lane from the Gulf of Oman to the Kharg terminal, allowing tankers to resume loading without fear of explosions. International shipping insurance rates, which would spike immediately after the invasion, would begin to fall as the lanes are declared safe, signaling to global markets that the crisis is being managed. Third, the American political leadership would have to execute a careful diplomatic campaign to turn the invasion into a bargaining chip rather than a permanent occupation. The goal would be to use control of Kharg as leverage to extract Iranian concessions on the Strait of Hormuz, the nuclear program, or regional aggression. The United States would signal through back channels that the island would be returned once Iran demonstrates a verifiable commitment to free navigation and ceases its threats. This is a delicate dance. If Iran perceives the occupation as a permanent land grab, it will have no incentive to negotiate, and every incentive to bleed the American garrison. Victory in this scenario would also depend on the ability of the United States to maintain the support of its allies and the global community. The Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, would need to quietly cooperate by allowing American overflights, providing basing access, and not taking actions that would escalate the conflict. European allies would need to support sanctions against Iran rather than call for an immediate American withdrawal. If the invasion is seen as a reckless unilateral action, the diplomatic cost could outweigh any military gains. But if it is framed as a necessary response to Iranian aggression, the United States could emerge with its deterrence credibility enhanced and its position in the region strengthened. Ultimately, an American victory in a Kharg invasion would be defined by its end state, not its beginning. The United States would win if it seizes the island, suppresses Iranian fires, reopens the strait, and then withdraws on its own terms, having demonstrated that Iran's most vital economic asset is vulnerable to American power. That is a narrow definition of victory, but in the Persian Gulf, where the stakes are measured in oil prices and global stability, narrow victories are often the only kind that last. How Iran could win even if it loses the island. Iran does not need to hold Kharg to claim victory. In fact, losing the island might play directly into Tehran's strategic narrative if the cost of occupation becomes unbearable for the United States. For Iran, victory would come not on the battlefield, but in the court of public opinion, the global oil market, and the endurance of American political will. The Iranians have studied the American experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they understand that a superpower can be defeated not by destroying its army, but by making the price of victory higher than the value of the objective. The first way Iran could win is by making the occupation economically unsustainable. Even before the first American soldier sets foot on Kharg, Iran could begin mining the Strait of Hormuz and the approaches to the island. Global oil prices would spike, perhaps doubling or tripling overnight, triggering recessions in oil-importing nations and angering American allies. Insurance premiums for tankers would skyrocket, and shipping companies would refuse to enter the Gulf, effectively closing the strait regardless of what the United States Navy does. The economic chaos that follows would create immense pressure on Washington to end the operation quickly, even if that means accepting Iranian terms. The second way Iran could win is by turning the invasion into a regional war. Iran has cultivated a network of proxies across the Middle East, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, as well as the Houthi movement in Yemen. In the event of an American invasion of Kharg, these proxies could be activated simultaneously. Hezbollah could launch rockets into Israel, drawing the Israeli military into the conflict and complicating American diplomatic efforts. Iraqi militias could attack American bases and the American embassy in Baghdad, creating a second front that stretches American military resources. Houthi forces could launch missiles at Saudi oil facilities, further disrupting global energy supplies. What begins as a limited operation against an island could quickly metastasize into a conflict that spans the entire region. The third way Iran could win is by making the occupation politically untenable for the American president. The American public has little appetite for another Middle Eastern war, especially one that involves sustained casualties. If Iranian missiles and drones inflict even modest losses on American forces, the political pressure to withdraw could become overwhelming. Television images of flag-draped coffins returning to Dover Air Force Base, combined with nightly footage of Marines hunkered down under rocket fire, would erode public support faster than any strategic argument could sustain it. Iran understands that American military power is formidable, but American political resolve is finite, and they would structure their response to test that resolve to its breaking point. Finally, Iran could win by framing the invasion as an act of American aggression, rallying international support against the United States. Russia and China, both of which have significant economic and strategic interests in Iran, would likely use the crisis to condemn American unilateralism at the United Nations and elsewhere. The European Union, dependent on Persian Gulf oil, would call for restraint and might distance itself from American actions. Iran could present itself as the victim of an unprovoked attack, positioning the conflict as a struggle against Western imperialism. In this narrative, Iran's loss of the island becomes a symbol of American brutality, and every day that American forces remain on Kharg becomes a propaganda victory for Tehran. In this sense, Iran's definition of victory is the mirror image of America's. While the United States seeks a quick, clean operation that restores deterrence and then ends, Iran seeks to transform that operation into a prolonged, costly, and diplomatically isolating quagmire. If Iran succeeds in that transformation, it will have won, even if its flag never flies over Kharg again. Is this an escalation trap? This final question hangs over every aspect of a potential Kharg invasion. Is the operation a masterstroke of coercive diplomacy, a limited strike that forces Iran to back down without triggering a wider war? Or is it an escalation trap? A seemingly manageable military action that inexorably draws the United States into a conflict far larger and more dangerous than anyone anticipated? The answer depends on assumptions that cannot be proven until after the first shots are fired. But the weight of historical experience suggests that the trap is the more likely outcome. The argument for the masterstroke rests on the idea that Iran is a rational actor that will not choose self-destruction. If the United States seizes Kharg, demonstrates its ability to hold it, and makes clear that the island will be returned only in exchange for Iranian concessions, Tehran may calculate that escalation is not worth the cost. Iran's leadership, while ideologically committed to resisting American influence, has shown pragmatism in previous crises. In 1988, after the United States destroyed half of Iran's navy in Operation Praying Mantis, Tehran chose to accept a ceasefire in its war with Iraq rather than escalate further. A similar dynamic could play out over Kharg, with Iran swallowing its pride and accepting a deal that allows it to resume oil exports while saving face. The masterstroke argument also emphasizes the limited nature of the operation. The United States would not be invading the Iranian mainland or attempting regime change. It would be seizing a small piece of territory with a narrow strategic purpose, then offering to give it back in exchange for Iranian good behavior. This is not the kind of existential threat that would force Iran to use its nuclear program as a last resort or launch a full-scale war. It is a measured use of force, calibrated to achieve a specific objective without crossing Tehran's red lines. The escalation trap argument, however, is far more persuasive when one examines the geography and the history of the Persian Gulf. Kharg sits within sight of the Iranian coast, and the same anti-ship missiles that Iran would use to defend the island can also strike the American ships supporting the invasion. If an Iranian missile hits an American warship and kills dozens of sailors, the American president would face an impossible choice: escalate further to punish Iran or accept a humiliating retreat. Escalation begets escalation, and in the confined waters of the Gulf, there is no room for a limited war to remain limited. Moreover, Iran's leaders have repeatedly stated that any attack on their territory, including islands like Kharg, would be met with a full-spectrum response. That response could include missile strikes on American bases in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait, as well as attacks on oil infrastructure across the region. The United States has approximately 40,000 troops stationed in the Gulf region, all of whom would become targets in a wider conflict. A limited operation against Kharg could easily become the spark that ignites a regional war involving multiple countries, with casualties measured in the thousands and economic damage measured in the trillions. The history of American military interventions in the Middle East is littered with operations that began with limited objectives and ended in prolonged, costly entanglements. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 was supposed to be a quick campaign to remove Saddam Hussein and establish a stable democracy. It instead became an 8-year war that cost thousands of American lives and trillions of dollars. The intervention in Libya in 2011 was supposed to be a limited humanitarian intervention. It instead left the country in chaos. Even the 1983 invasion of Grenada, often cited as a successful limited operation, was far simpler than any operation against Iran would be. In the final analysis, the distinction between masterstroke and escalation trap may be impossible to discern before the operation begins. What is clear is that the decision to invade Kharg would represent one of the most consequential choices an American president could make, with risks that extend far beyond the island's shores. It is a gamble, and in the Persian Gulf, where oil, religion, and national pride intersect, the house does not always lose. If you made it this far, don't forget to like the video, hit the hype button, and subscribe to our channel for more ominous topics. We greatly appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you in the next video.